Good afternoon. Good afternoon, friends. It's great to see everyone. We're so glad you're here. I just got off of I-95, and I think the expression is I came in hot. I was at the corner of Frying Pan Road, and I thought, I'm going to press on it and go there. And the police officer that we paid to be here was right behind me. I thought, no, I'll just take it easy. I'll just take it slow. It'll be fine. So I'm especially grateful to see you. My name is Tom Berlin. I'm the lead pastor at Floris United Methodist Church, which is where you are. And we're just so pleased to be hosting this event with all of my colleagues here. You're going to hear from them. I'm here just to do the simple welcome and to tell you how glad I am to see you and how glad we are collectively to see you. I also want you to know if you're brand new to our facility, if you walk out and to the left, you'll find a restroom. If you walk out and to the right and take another right, you'll find a restroom. They're all out there. But make yourself at home while you're here, but I think you're going to want to be right in the space that you're at right now because I think you've got a great couple of hours ahead of you. I'm going to ask Reverend if you would come forward. Reverend, if you would come up and just take the show.
Thank you. Can we give Tom Berlin and the Floris United Methodist Church a great round of applause for hosting us this afternoon? Tom, I must confess, though, this could be very dangerous. You've just turned the microphone over to a black Baptist minister and said we only have 2 hours to get this done. Nearly impossible.
We have more in common than you know.
Okay, all right. My name is Vernon Walton. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the senior pastor of the First Baptist Church of Vienna, and I'm delighted to be here with my brothers and sisters, and more importantly, I am delighted that you thought enough about us and this experience and this conversation to come and to share this afternoon with us. Would you give yourselves a great round of applause? My task and responsibility is simply this, is to help us to get out on time. Seriously, we're delighted you've come to be with us. We've had a wonderful experience over the past several months, engaging in conversation, sharing together on the bus trip, and we're delighted to be able to open up our hearts and our minds and allow you to eavesdrop on the conversation that we have been engaged in over the past several months. And we pray that this is not the end, but just the beginning of what is to come. And not just from this experience, but we pray that lives are changed, hearts are richer, and certainly that we will have impact not only in this community, but that this experience will transform not only this place, but that this experience will transform the world. The first thing I want to do is to kind of set the context and to help you understand how we arrived at this particular moment. How many of you are from the state of Virginia? All right, so we're in good company. February of 2019, if you can just for a moment go back to the beginning of February of 2019, which is also known to us as African American History Month, a significant time in our country, significant particularly for those of us who are of African American heritage, and we celebrate the blessings that God and how God has brought us through and how God has continued to keep his hand upon our lives. It's an interesting time in the state of Virginia, not only just an interesting time, but in fact a very painful time. At the beginning of February of 2019, as we're launching celebrations around not only the state of Virginia, but around the nation, we learned right here in Virginia that our governor was pictured in blackface. That particular picture not only hit news throughout our Commonwealth, but that particular conversation forced us to engage in conversation around the United States and in some instances around the world. Conversations that in many cases made us extremely uncomfortable. We were forced to wrestle with what that picture meant. We were forced to wrestle not only with what that picture meant, but we were forced to have conversations about what the future of our state was really going to be and how we were going to respond, not only as human beings, but how we were going to respond to this particular picture as a faith community. Feeling a great sense of pain, tremendous sense of not knowing really what to do, there's a group of clergy who summons me. Let the church say summons me. In my tradition, that means you repeat what I say. Let the church say summons me. All right, we're going to get through this. Seriously, one particular night, about 4 or 5 group of clergy persons, faith leaders, met in the office of Rabbi Holzman. And that particular night, we engaged in serious conversation about what it really meant to be African American in America. We engaged with the reality of what it meant also, likewise, what it meant and what it means to be white in America, and what it means to be African American in the faith tradition, in the context of faith, and how we engage one another, how we understand one another, perhaps even how and what we don't know about each other. And for many of us, it was the very first time that we engaged in conversation on that particular level. And at that particular moment, we realized that this conversation had to extend and go beyond us in that particular office. We also understood on that particular night that we had to do something. But the reality was we did not know what we were going to do. And so while we were pained from that particular situation, while we were pained by that particular experience, we left there looking for clarity. We left there looking for answers. But we continued the conversation. We continued to wrestle with the hard questions and the hard realities. We continue to have open minds about our naivete. We continue to have open minds about our misunderstandings. We continue to have open conversation about perhaps how even we may have contributed to somebody else feeling let down and left out. And as a result of that conversation, we opened the conversation up to other faith leaders, and we gathered yet again here at Floris, and there were persons, faith leaders from all over the Commonwealth of Virginia, particularly and specifically Northern Virginia. We gathered and we continued that conversation, and subsequently we found ourselves on a bus, 25 faith leaders, over a 3-day period, traveling around some of the most historic and bloody sites throughout our Commonwealth, where blood spoke from the ground, some stories told, some stories known, countless stories untold and unknown, but feeling the sense of pain that spoke and cried out from the ground. And we wrestled yet again with the conversation of who we are and how we must get along and how we would work together to not only change the Commonwealth of Virginia, but how we would work together to change the world. And tonight is not the culmination of that conversation. It's the culmination perhaps of the bus ride, but certainly not the culmination of the conversation. And so again, I welcome you to this space, and I invite you tonight into the conversation that you would hear from us, but more importantly, that we would hear from you. One more time, would you give yourselves a great round of applause? I'm going to invite my colleagues who shared with me on this journey to quickly come to the front, stand with me, and we're going to ask you very, very quickly just to share your name, your faith tradition, and the place where you serve.
I'm Lynn Stanton Hoyle, and I'm a member of National Capital Presbytery, and I'm currently retired and grateful to be able to be part of this.
I'm Kay Scary. I'm an intern at the First Baptist Church of Herndon, and likewise grateful for this experience and time with all of you.
I'm Scott Ramsey. I'm the pastor at Lewinsville Presbyterian Church in McLean.
I'm Becca Messman. I am a co-pastor at Trinity Presbyterian Church here in Herndon and co-chair of Voice in Northern Virginia.
Rob Cheeks, senior pastor, Shiloh Baptist Church, McLean, Virginia.
Beth Goss, pastor, Church of the Covenant in Arlington, Virginia.
And I'm Tom Berlin, the lead pastor here at Floris.
I'm Sean Roberts, pastor of First Baptist Church of Herndon.
I'm Michelle Mickens, pastor of Washington Plaza Baptist Church in Reston. Hello, I'm Naeem Beg. I'm imam at Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center in Falls Church, Virginia.
Jackie Hollingsworth, retired pastor from the AME Church in Sterling, Virginia.
I'm Kathy McCullough. I'm a Presbyterian minister, and I'm serving as a pastoral counselor at Center for Pastoral Counseling of Virginia.
I'm Amy Sabowith. I'm the rabbi at Beit Chavarim Reform Congregation in Ashburn, Virginia, for our Jewish community.
I'm Tuck Bauerfein. I'm rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Alexandria.
I'm Reverend Vernon Davis, a minister at First Baptist Church, Vienna.
I'm Michael Holzman. I'm one of the rabbis at Northern Virginia Hebrew Congregation in Reston, and I'm also on the Voice Strategy team.
Thank you. Thank you. You may be seated. Please welcome Becca as she introduces our short featured film.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? This is a...
There.
Is it on? Okay. This is a beautiful sight to see. This is a beautiful sight to see. I am glad to be able to share with you something that is a gift. It's truly a gift. The videographer for this is a woman named Meta Bastet, and she is a young African-American woman from the Richmond area who journeyed with us throughout this trip. And it is her story as well as ours. There were times when she was filming and weeping along with us as she captured these images. We came to know her and came to create the itinerary of this trip through a history professor at University of Virginia named Ed Ayers. He is connected to many different leaders in the state of Virginia. And we got on the phone with him and said, if we went on a bus, where would we go? Where should we go? And he said, well, you'd have to go to Charlottesville, and you'd have to go to Danville, and then I'd highly recommend going to Drake's Branch. Drake's Branch is a place where there was a lynching, and I would say famous, except that no one knows about it. But it is significant because it was the place where a man was lynched named Richard Walker, and an African-American newspaper published his story, and the editor of that African-American newspaper was so threatened by the KKK, they said, if you do that, the same fate will happen to you. And instead, this African-American journalist went to Drake's Branch with his friends Smith and Wesson and said, bring it, and lived to tell about it. That is another key moment of the resilience that was why we went to Drake's Branch. And then we ended up in Richmond. And so I am excited to share with you her gift to us. There was a grant from National Capital Presbytery, along with many generous faith congregations who helped to make this possible. So in all of your different congregations, when you're doing this work and you wonder what it can lead to, your stories inspire bigger things, and that's our hope for tonight as well. It's a group of there's 23 of us, clergy and faith leaders. Many of us just wanted to form deeper relationships. We know that relationships are the way that people change. That's the direction of our faith. And everyone signed up to be part of this because they wanted to learn, and they wanted to be vulnerable, and they wanted to be real, and they wanted to be authentic. But they also wanted to interrogate the places where the racial history of the state happened.
I grew up with a Civil War buff father, so like in my home, that was a reality. I managed to live 37 years as a Virginian without any formal place to learn the reality of what Virginia is.
To imagine that people built a narrative of faith that would subjugate and objectify people, it just gives me deep grief.
I like history because I'm a Virginian, because people from here tend to, because if you're white, you're mentored in that. But you end up with heroes that later you realize are the wrong heroes. And then I come here and the CEO of this organization says, We will never get right with each other until we get history right.
We can no longer afford to tell each other comforting myths and lies about our past. It doesn't serve us. And history, quite frankly, has never been for the dead. So we got to get it right.
We stand here at this moment, hearts humbled, as we remember all of those whose lives have been taken needlessly because of white supremacy and our inability to see one another as all as beloved children of God.
If you are in an environment or you by birth has been placed on top of the food chain, why would you want to give that up?
So I'm joining the water-free ancestors.
Unless you truly a follower of Christ and you follow his commandment when it says, love your brother as you love thyself. It gives me hope to see this group, churches, begin to really deal with the hard truths and says, I want a better world, but I must give this up in order for us to be equal.
Sinai for Jews is this moment where our truth is established as a covenant with God, and yet right there in Exodus 19, it says, purify yourselves for 3 days. Do not go near a woman. So clearly Moses was not talking to the women. And therefore we really weren't all standing there at Sinai. And I was struck by the way that a myth can be sacred and reinterpreted. That a myth can be sacred and flawed. And it made me think about the American myth, all the American myths that are sacred and yet need reinterpreting because they're false.
We talk about the other side not wanting to talk about it, but our families do not want to bring that pain up, but learn to live the best way we can.
Danville has long been one of Virginia's primary industrial centers. Giant looms hum at the Dan River Mills, one of the world's largest textile manufacturing plants where more than 10,000 Danville citizens work. Danville is proud of its quiet residential areas, which surround the business and industrial heart of the city. The many old homes are a reminder of the city's colorful past, when it served briefly as capital of the Confederacy.
June 10th is called Bloody Monday because the marchers were beaten so severely.
Danville, when they start talking about Bloody Monday, I was a young person, but I remember the talks among our community.
The High Street experience and just being stunned to be able to be in the presence of those giants there. Just giants that I didn't even know that story.
One of the police walked forward and said to us in a harsh voice, I command you to leave. And Reverend McGee said, let us bow our heads and pray. And so we bowed our heads in prayer, but I was looking. So watch and pray. He said, pray, watch and pray. So I did look, I peeped, and I learned some things. I saw this big red truck. The driver got out and he started unwinding a big pipe and turned it on us at full force. And it was so strong, there was no way you could stand on your feet, because I was thrown against a state car.
I'm feeling sad and stunned and inspired. Sad in that I grew up with this from well-meaning white liberal parents and a well-meaning white liberal church, and I still had the sense that this is how things were, and I understood it in a general way, and sad that it was never taught in a more specific way. And as I'm hearing of the systematic creative ways that white people made damn sure that they stayed on top. I'm just stunned at the relentlessness of that. And so I've been inspired by the folks at High Street who just face this with dignity and courage and hope and love.
The people who continue to live in a place and bear witness to it. But the people in Danville, especially at High Street, those have been the most powerful moments, is hearing from the people who have lived this history.
So here in Richmond, where the Lumpkins jail is situated, and you'll see that tomorrow, it's down the hill from the church where Patrick Henry says, "Give me liberty or give me death," while he is holding women, men, and children in chattel slavery. When people say, we want to come and we want to talk about race, I would say, well, what do you want to know? Tell your folks to knock it off. We're clear. The conversation is not necessarily, tell me your trauma, tell me your trauma. If you really want to know how to fix a thing, it's internal, and you have to do your work. And it's your work to do. You have to examine, who am I? Go back into your family history and find out, who are you? Where did you come from? Were your people in any way associated with this criminality?
I keep coming back to the concept of shame. Not to be debilitating, but to say, yes, my heritage is complicit in this.
Yesterday, maybe when Dr. Carmichael was talking about the triangle, the Liverpool, Benin, Liverpool, Richmond triangle, that I had one of my first white ancestors to arrive traverse the Liverpool to Richmond part of that, because he was a stowaway on a ship from Liverpool as a 12-year-old. So, and I know that his grandson owned enslaved people in Chesterfield County, not too far away. So I get emotional thinking about that, the pieces of things that I'm learning, but I hope that through the learning, and particularly through the learning and relationship that we're doing, that I will be able to work towards the action piece.
I was struck when we were in Charlottesville and the Methodist minister shared with us that he had not talked about that experience to any other group besides his church in Danville. I didn't know that. I didn't know those stories. Part of my fear, I heard you. I'm dealing with my fear is I'm not sure I don't know how to share them, but I want to.
What do I do with this? I'm thinking that so much of this, I feel like we know what the issues are. There are issues of, on many levels, but some concrete things like housing inequity and some obvious opportunities that we see. These are differences and they're problems. And yet there's this thing of humans, I want to provide for my children. And so the temptation, I think, is to say, well, that's where my privilege goes. So where does that conversation actually happen? How far do we go with truth-telling? Back to the UPA thing of, how do I tell the truth? How do I live the truth that hurts?
The two metaphors that I'm taking away are the serpentine walls of UVA, which I learned about as a tour guide and now see as the instruments of sanitizing what no one wants to look at. And then the other was when Dr. Carmichael talked about how Black people are from the water. Like, they're not able to go home to Africa or home to a place that abused and assaulted and erased their voices and faces. So what does it mean to be close to the water? And you can either dive in and take a bunch of people with you, and that's that despair, or that's also the baptismal imagery of belonging and deliverance and crossing the Red Sea.
I see these last few days as a pilgrimage, and I'm a northerner, so I read about the South. I didn't like much about what I read. And I was grateful that I wasn't alive then, because I think I would have been dead trying to react to my environment.
The notion that people of color, that African Americans carry, there's a certain degree of pain that we carry in our DNA, and we respond to that in many ways, sometimes in healthy ways, sometimes in unhealthy ways, but that is how a people respond to generational trauma. And just the awareness that others do not and have not ever carried that burden. And so I'm holding all of that as I return to my congregation.
I'm feeling, first of all, very thankful, and thinking that there's some way we need to honor all of the people who have been so generous with the time with us. And secondly, I'm feeling just like drowning. There is so much that has to be dealt with, and I feel so inadequate.
As I listened to the stories, I heard a tremendous sense of resilience. That, you know, in spite of what you threw, in spite of, you know, how you attempted to hold us back, that every time you threw a blow, we just kept coming back. That's a resilience that I cannot explain, other than only by the grace of God.
I was amazed by the forgiveness of the brothers and sisters who were presenting painful history. I did not hear revenge or but it was more pain, but we are willing to forgive you for what you have done.
So my prayer, Father and our God, I ask that you would provide healing, further understanding and clarity as relates to what you've called us to be change agents in this whole regard as relates to race reconciliation.
So I'm grateful and I'm thankful to be here on this journey with you guys, with a group of people who are serious about seeing things change. But it's going to require the church, it's going to clergy, faith, belief, and those who lead, I believe, who are not going to be led up by culture, but that he would truly impact culture rather than culture impacting us in the church, in the temples, and the mosques. That we can truly be who we need to be.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Gonna keep on walking, keep on walking, walking to the freedom land. Gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, I'm gonna keep on walking, go marching up to freedom land. Amen. Amen.
We are blessed this afternoon to have what we have named the Collective Choir under the direction of Keon McKnight, the band that includes members of Floris United Methodist as well as First Baptist Church. Would you give them a great round of applause as they minister to us out of their collective experience? One more time. Let's give him another round of applause. As you can tell from the video, hearts were impacted. As you can tell from the video, this experience caused deep reflection. We thought it was important to continue that reflection this afternoon in your presence. And so I want to invite a few of our friends to take the seats that are behind me, and we're going to allow you to eavesdrop. Can right here? All right. Right here. We'll do it right here. We're going to ask those persons whose names are printed on the itinerary for the afternoon to come forward, and they're going to share with you some of the memorable experiences, some of their reflections, some of the life-changing events, some of the water-shedding moments that took place as a result of our time together. Would you welcome them to the microphone?
You know, this was an incredible experience, and I am thankful that you are here to listen and to allow us to share about this. There's so much that took place, so much that happened to, I'm sure, all of us. We can't just tell it all, but I just want to share just a little bit, just one thought from my experience, something that I've been dealing with, and that was on our first stop. We went to the University of Virginia, and we were there to tour the academical village that Thomas Jefferson started. You know, that was the first part of the campus. That's what he created. And something I want to share with you is that when I was in seminary, I went to a church. I worked for a church that was built after Monticello, the home of Thomas Jefferson. It looked like the back of a nickel. Our church looked like that. And so as Baptists, we appreciate Jefferson. We love Jefferson because of the freedom, religious freedom that he brought, and we celebrate that, especially Baptists from Virginia. And so when we went on the campus there and we saw that village, you could feel the Jefferson influence. You could see it. It looked like Jefferson. It looked like Monticello. It looked like Poplar Floris. It looked like my church in seminary. And we could tell that Jefferson had this influence. But what we began to learn is that Jefferson's design, even though it was incredible and well thought out, that he designed it around mastery, meaning that those who were above, those who were higher in status would literally be above the people. So the professors, the leaders, were on the second floor. And the students were then just one step above the ground. And the enslaved people were hidden in the back and sometimes down the hill. And we traveled beyond the village, and we saw those serpentine walls that were built and what Jefferson is often known for. But what we discovered is that part of the reason that they were there was to hide the enslaved people. And what we heard on that tour is that Jefferson struggled with slavery, that he didn't think that it was right, but he could not imagine, I guess, his own life and the life of our country without it. So he didn't think it was right. He saw that it was wrong, but he could not imagine. He did not have the imagination to see beyond it. So when he went to design his school, he tried to hide the enslaved people. And what I think about is when I face big problems, and racism is a big problem, and it's a complicated problem, and there is a lot for me to see and understand and learn. When I deal with those big issues, there's a part of me that just wants to hide it. And as a white man, I can do that. That's part of my privilege. Part of my privilege is I don't have to think about it all the time. I can tuck it away. I can hide it if I want to. But when I do, I'm just allowing for more abuse and more problems. Because when Jefferson hid the enslaved people, they were abused, raped, beaten, and even killed because it was hidden. We can't hide it anymore. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My reflection is a combination of on my phone and written by hand because there were so many thoughts that were going through my head as I prepared to do this. And the section of this program says something about architecture and history. And so as I reflected on that, I just did a quick Google search. And this is Wikipedia's definition of architecture. Architecture is both the process and the product of planning, designing, and constructing buildings or any other structure. The way our nation is structured is problematic. Architectural works in the material form of buildings are often perceived as cultural symbols and as works of art. And so, Sean, as you were talking about our visit to UVA, which is renowned for its beauty and for its architecture and just the tremendous, example of colonial architecture and Thomas Jefferson with all of his advances and everything, I just think about that. And I think about the colonial structures and that many of these that we think are so beautiful were erected by the bloodied and calloused hands of slave labor, and erected structures that were designed to hide the ugliness upon which this nation's wealth was and still is built. A structure takes planning and design, and a structure also requires maintenance and upkeep. And sadly, most of predominantly white America does not want to know the details about how that house was built, and does not want to take a look at the ugly blueprint, and does not want to peek behind the walls that hide the ugliness of race. And the preacher in me always wants to say and use the universal we. We must find a better way. We must. I can't use that we in this particular instance because in truth, before we can address the issue of race in Virginia, you must first be willing to address the issue of Virginia's racial history, meaning people who are not of color. You must be willing to have conversations, not just with us, to learn from our experiences, but to have conversations among yourselves to unearth the rot that often lays at the root of our understanding of what race in America is and why certain people in this country find themselves struggling for generation upon generation upon generation. I can help lead, but I cannot lead this drive because I am not white, even though I pastor a predominantly white congregation in Reston, Virginia. A white congregation called a black woman pastor, isn't that an indication that this is all behind us? No, it is not. And so when I embarked on this trip, it was not just as a black woman experiencing the painful history of racism and white supremacy, but I also took the trip as a pastor seeking a way to lead my congregation, whom I love dearly, into a deeper conversation and interrogation of race. And so as I took the journey, I hoped and I prayed that the white clergy who were on the trip would find themselves compelled to take up this work, compelled to finally do the heavy lifting and to push through the shame and the discomfort that this conversation always stirs up. The Black feminist poet and essayist Audre Lorde has a quote that says, "You cannot dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." And so the question that all of us ask ourselves on this day, that you as an individual must ask yourself on this day is, are you ready to dismantle the house that racism built? Or would you just prefer to continue residing there? And so my hope and my prayer today is that those of us who have turned out on this day will find within us a new form of bravery to lay down the tools of privilege and the tools of willful ignorance that built this house, and that we might all somehow become emboldened to build a better house for everyone. I still have not given up that hope, but it's not something that Black people can do alone. And to ask us to continue over and over and over to lead the way is in itself an injustice. Amen. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum. May the peace be upon all of you. Pain is in the DNA of African American people, said Dr. Marquita Carmichael Carruthers. Taking a trip during Ramadan, the month of fasting, is tough. But I didn't want to miss this opportunity. So I said yes the moment I received an email from Rabbi Michael Holtzman inviting me to join faith leaders from Northern Virginia on this sacred journey in this sacred month. I thought I knew the word, what lynching meant. I knew the word, and I knew what it meant. But what I didn't know, that it was not just a word, but it was an institution. An institution of terror, an institution of dehumanizing people, and the pain which it brought did not just stay with the person who received the lynching, but in the words of Dr. Marquita, pain is in the DNA of African American people. I felt her pain. It was in her eyes when she started to tell us the brutality of Lumpkin's jail. The next day, we were taken to Lumpkin's jail. It looked like a big parking lot next to a factory-looking building on one side and Highway 95 on the other. Where are we? I asked myself. There was nothing that looked interesting. But the bus stopped and we were told to come off the bus. Our tour leaders started to walk in a certain direction and we followed. Then they stopped at a 4-foot-tall iron fence and entered the area that it was surrounding. This was Lumpkin's jail. But nothing stands there today, just a large ground, probably the size of a baseball field. The Lumpkin's jail stood on the Richmond slave trail, the trail which started from the Manchester docks and ended at the African burial grounds in Richmond. Lumpkin's jail was owned by Robert Lumpkin, who built the multi-purpose structure to hold enslaved Africans for auction and provided lodging for the holders. The enslaved Africans called this place as the Devil's Half Acre. The runaway slaves were brought here for punishment and later sold in the auction. Robert Lumpkin was a businessman who bought unwanted enslaved Africans and brought them to his jail compound in Richmond in the 1840s. there was a designated whipping room where slaves were stretched out on the floor and flogged. According to an account from Anthony Burns, who was an enslaved African who gave to his biographer, Charles Emery Stevens, the slave was isolated in a room only 6 or 8 feet square, on a top floor accessible by trap door. Most of the time he was kept handcuffed and fettered, causing his feet to swell enormously. The fetters also prevented him from removing his clothes by day or night, and no one came to help him. His room became more foul and noisome than the hovel of a brute. Loathsome, creeping things multiplied and writhed in the filth. He was fed putrefied meat and given little water, and soon fell seriously ill. Through the cracks in the floor, he observed a female slave stripped naked for a potential buyer. In April 1865, when the city fell to Union soldiers, there were some 50 enslaved men, women, and children. In 1867, Mary Lumpkin, the wife of Robert Lumpkin, who was light-skinned African woman herself, leased the jail to a Baptist minister named Nathaniel Colder. That school later became Virginia Union University in Richmond. It is said that the black students couldn't sleep at their new seminary. They reported hearing the cries and screams of the enslaved humans being tortured. And as I prayed on the grounds of Lumpkin's jail, I asked myself, are we all hearing those cries?
Wow. One thing of coming up in the ending of this particular topic, everyone has said what I've written down. So I'm going to start from the heart. You know, when I came on this tour, when I decided to come on this tour, I am born and raised Virginian. I am from the Tidewater area. I know all about Richmond and Petersburg and all those areas. And I grew up during the mid-50s and 60s when I watched a railroad track divide us across from one neighborhood to another, and there were some stores that we couldn't go into, and when we did go into it, our mother would hold our hands and tell us to be still. So when I decided as a clergy to go on this tour, I asked myself, what am I expecting from this? Because I already know about these places. However, when I started with UVA and the tour guide was sharing the history, and it's been talked about the slaves living in the back and how the students were even allowed to come in and rape the slave women with no consequences. It kind of caused me some bitterness. And then I had a concern that maybe the tour guide himself did not know the sensitivity of what he was talking about, because it seemed sort of, to me, a nonchalant sharing, almost as if you could be proud of it. And I'm sure he didn't mean it that way, but that's how I received it. And we're talking about the historical impact. And so here's my impact, is I said, this is reminding me, and then it's touching my heart. But then we went on to the clergy collective group in Charlottesville, where they talked about the tiki, the white nationalists coming, and the pastor, who is a white man, who stood there and in tears said it concerned him that it seemed like he couldn't protect the people who were in his church because they couldn't go out the church door because of all the hate that was outside waiting on them. And my heart was stirred again. It had an impact. But I was good. I knew, it wasn't no surprise to me, one who has experienced it face to face. I've been in bus stations and places of public places in my hometown that said colored only, colored water fountains, and the mistreatments, and watching how our parents would protect us. But then we went on to Danville and Bloody Sunday, and we went to all these places. But what got me the most was the Virginia Union University, when the Professor Carmichael talked about reconciliation and African Americans dealing with their pain. Because the truth of the matter is that we cannot no longer sit still and say we don't have any part in it. I don't want to hear it because it's my pain. African Americans are known to carry their pain, or it turns into anger and we respond the wrong way. So the historical impact for me was, I've got to learn to deal with the pain I'm feeling. I've got to talk about this, and I've got to tell my community that we need to talk about it. We need to talk about the fact that we don't know, when they say go back to where you come from, we don't have a come from place. We need to talk about, yes, it makes me angry when some other culture doesn't understand why we cry, the pain that we have, and why we have this thing of Black Lives Matter. We need to talk about it among ourselves. And then we have to go and encourage our white communities that we need your help as well. First of all, you've got to take a whole accountability. Even if you were not part of slavery, even if you was not a slave owner, you're benefiting from your forefathers. The privilege of as it was said earlier by Sean, he says, he can just tuck it away. African Americans can't tuck it away. We have to hide our pain. But I say to you today, the historical impact that I received on this tour was no longer. Because one of the things that came to my mind is that this is a history repeating itself. And it's going to keep on repeating itself until we learn how to deal with the history, until we know our history and understand our history and can talk with one another with intelligence. That there is a place where we can go, that we can be healed in talking about our pain. We can be healed in accepting the responsibility of living in a privileged society and how we can help each other. So my sharing and my impact was that it was a reminder to me to don't forget where you come from.
I'm really thankful to you all for coming out on a lovely Sunday afternoon to spend your time here this afternoon. And I'm really grateful to my colleagues and friends from the trip who are so committed to doing this work. It's increasingly clear to me that this work is essential for our faith communities and congregations to be about. and to be doing. Every now and then, folks will say, why do we need to talk about this in church? We need to talk about this in church. If we are to, with any integrity, claim that we acknowledge and cherish the image of God in all people, then we've got to be working towards healing the racial hostility and violence of systems that we have inherited and in which we participate today. And as I've been thinking about this, it seems to me that there is both an outer aspect to this work and an inner aspect to this work. On the outer path, we need to, in different ways, stand up and call out white supremacy where we see it in others and in our society. But I am learning, especially from my colleagues on this trip, that we also must notice it and name it when we see it in ourselves. And here I am talking primarily to those of us who are white in this room. The honest self-reflection work that is involved here is essential if we are going to then name it in others without having a spirit of self-righteousness when we do it. And as I've been reflecting on this, especially since the trip in May, I have been dismayed to realize how deeply the narratives and the assumptions of white supremacy are wired inside of me, inside of Scott Ramsey. These are unexamined ideas that lie somewhere down within me. The idea that to be white is to be normal, and to be a person of color is somehow to be different, that is an idea that lurks within me. It is a demon in me that needs exorcism and healing. And Presbyterians aren't known for talking a lot about demons and healing like that. But that's what this is. These are not things I'm proud of, but they are things of which I have become freshly aware. Those of us who are white, we've got a lot of work to do, friends. A lot of work to do to become aware of the privilege that we do not even notice, to become aware of assumptions we're walking around with about how the world works. And that's work that's for us to do. There are lots and lots of resources to draw upon, just to mention two of them that I am finding helpful, in case these might be helpful to you as well. There's a book, some of you will know it, entitled White Fragility, subtitled, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. There's also a workbook that's titled Me and White Supremacy. There are lots of others. When I was in seminary, I heard a white pastor who has been one of my models for doing this work, and he opened an anti-racism workshop where we were learning about the history of racism and the current effects of racism. And I would imagine some of my white friends who went to the workshop, we were very proud of ourselves for going to this workshop and congratulated ourselves for being alert and awake about these things. And this pastor opened up the workshop and said, I am a racist. That is where I have to begin this work. I have never heard anybody talk like that in public. And when he said this, he did not say it with pride, far from saying it with pride, but he also did not say it with self-hatred or self-blame or self-defensiveness. The way he said it, as I've thought about what was in him that he was saying it like this, he said it in very similar ways to when someone who's in recovery says, I'm an alcoholic. He acknowledged that he was walking around with this disease, this demon, this addiction of white superiority that was in him, and he was working at it, and he was working on the road of recovery. That's where we are as well.
I know a lot of stories from my family. I know the ones that we tell a lot, the ones that we're proud of. I know my grandmother helped to reintegrate schools in Georgia as a school teacher. I love to tell that story. I take that spirit of her Presbyterianness into my being. But all of this started for me when she passed away and gave me a book, and in the back of the book was curled a will. And I opened the will, and in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, willed to me forever and ever. This is from a great-great-grandfather who lived somewhere in Virginia, Randolph County, were list off of properties, 100 horses, or however many sow are alive upon my decease, and then the names of human beings. Willed to me in the name of Jesus Christ forever and ever. And I am going to do the work so that Jesus Christ will see me through that incredible grace. I'm from Danville, Virginia. I went to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and now I live right off of Lee Highway in Arlington, Virginia, just a few miles from the nation's capital. The path of privilege, paved in red colonial brick. And there were good people along that path who taught me to love Jesus, to serve others, to trust institutions, and to look with suspicion on anyone who put sugar on grits. And that path has brought me here with new questions like, why was I never taught about Bloody Monday in Danville? Why did I never hear a sermon about the Civil War or the Civil Rights Movement when the last capital of the Confederacy was right next door? Why did I learn how to walk backwards as a tour guide at UVA and yet never learn the stories of enslaved people who built the place? Why did we pour sweetener on stories that are truly painful? I'm a mom now. And mothers, you know this, are trained to look at things with eyes squinted and to ask things like, are you really okay? Why are you walking funny? Tell me what really happens. Baby, where does it hurt? And I'm starting to see that ribbon of highway from many generations ago, from Danville to Charlottesville to Washington, D.C., not as a badge of honor, some privileged garden walkway, but more of a gaping wound. And I start to look at our state, at our leaders, at my own family, at myself, and say, something's not right. Why are we walking funny? Why are we putting so much weight on one narrative? Tell me what really happened back then. I have got to know. I've got to know. And I do look at my brothers and sisters of color and say, please, tell me where it hurts. Tell me where it hurts still. Tell me where it hurts. This experience has cracked me open. It is not done. And hopefully, being open to the light, to the movement of the Spirit, to the air of truth, will truly set us free and allow this stubborn wound to heal.
First, let me thank the planning team, my colleagues. I'm indebted to you all, and certainly richly blessed by you all, and certainly the time having spent with you all on this journey. It was a struggle. Participating in the tour and the various stops from the first day on to the conclusion, the last stop, I struggled. Reason being, for obvious reasons, I'm a black male. And so with all the emotions that have just rushed immediately right back, I'm thankful I've written something down. Richard Wright's native son and black boy each spoke powerfully of the culture of suspicion, accusation, persecution, and destruction that every young man of color in this country had to navigate in an attempt simply just to exist in the 1940s. Ferguson, Missouri, Sanford, Florida, Staten Island, New York, Baltimore, Maryland, just to name a few. Our most recent reminders that the culture that devalued black life then still very much lives today. This is a fact demonstrated by the timeline of black lives destroyed by systemic or institutional racism that devalued black life as a matter of course. In order to appreciate the depth of this uniquely American genocidal continuum, one cannot look through white lenses. One cannot look through white eyes, but must look through black ones. Beloved, when was the last time you heard of a story of an angry black mob or a black police officer harassing, profiling, or killing an innocent white life? When was the last time you heard of a community watch person of African descent following, threatening, and then shooting an unarmed white child who's just so happenly walking home from 7-Eleven to purchase some Skittles and a Slurpee? As you ponder these questions, you are experiencing cognitive dissonance. Your mind is literally turning on itself as it's trying to reconcile the ideas that are fundamentally opposed. Literally, you cannot think of an actual instance or conceive in theory a case of the kind of narcissistic black entitlement that would lead to the destruction of white life. And so I say all that to say this: the overall tour was a major blessing. It was very encouraging yet challenging. It was painful yet purposeful. It hurt, yet it helped. It helped me to realize that there's still hope. And I'm thankful again to my colleagues for the hope that you helped me to recognize and realize. So while I struggled at times with my own existence, and now I struggle with the major concerns for our almost 2-year-old son, I'm encouraged by the strength of my ancestors. I'm encouraged by the strength of my great-grands, my grands, and my parents. And certainly I cannot wait to share with my son that his history does not start with Jamestown, that his history does not start with a diaspora. I cannot wait to share that we are descendants of royalty, that we come from a line of kings and queens. And I cannot wait to help him understand never to tolerate the destruction of black life at black hands either. Change is possible. So I'm excited about the change that we're a part of. I'm excited about the change that's brewing in the air even on tonight, because I'm always reminded of the words that lead to certain revolution within any nation. If my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways,
Then will I hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land.
Wow. You've heard some of the personal reflections from those who journeyed on this experience. You've heard some of the joys as well as some of the sorrows. You're still able to hear the wrestling that took place, the wrestling that still is taking place today. I said at the beginning of the program that this is not the culmination, but this is merely the continuance of the conversation. I'm going to invite at this particular moment Tom, Naeem, Michael, and Michelle to join me on the panel. And we're going to provide an opportunity for those of you who have just heard some of the reflections to raise some questions of us who journeyed these 3 days together. There will be persons throughout the congregation sharing microphones, and if you have a question that is on your heart, if there's a question that is on your mind, we invite you at this particular time to rise, and someone will approach you with a microphone, and we invite you to participate and to share with us in conversation.
We have one over here.
Thank you. I suppose in the spirit of the 12-step program that Scott Ramsey talked about, I should say, I am John and I am a racist. I'm sure I have many unexamined aspects of racism within me that need to be extirpated. When you talked about the fact that racism still exists, my wife and I were in Atlanta for an event earlier this year and took a couple days to go down to Montgomery to see the Equal Justice Institute Museum and Memorial down there, which I highly recommend. It's overwhelming and very, very affecting. And it didn't express it in these words, but it kind of talked about racism 1.0 was, or slavery 1.0 was slavery. Slavery 2.0 was Jim Crow. Slavery 3.0 is mass incarceration, and I might add voter suppression and some of the stuff that you see going on right now. And so I hope that well, let me say, first of all, this event and your organization seems so hopeful. It's almost like the seed of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which this country so badly needs. And I hope that you thrive and prosper and many more members of the clergy join you. But one of the current aspects of racism in the Commonwealth was one that was raised up just recently at Reverend Davis's church. There was an event on environmental justice, and in the wake of the discovery that the governor of the Commonwealth had been in blackface numerous times, William Barber II, the founder of the
My brother,
Moral
do you have
Mondays.
We'd love to hear from you, but do you have a specific question?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
So I wanted to say, yeah, I'm not even a Black Baptist preacher, and I'm going on too long. I'm sorry.
You're in the running, sir. let's have that.
So
question.
what I hope that you will focus on is some of the current issues, including the pipeline in Buckingham County, where they want to build a compressor station in Union Hill, right conveniently where the black folks live. And there is stuff going on right now that could stand the attention of a group like you. And my question is whether you will add that to your no doubt long list of things to focus on. And I apologize for going on so long.
Not a problem. Let me just respond to that this way. And one of that took place just this past Thursday, and it was held at First Baptist. One of the key and critical points that was made at that event when talking about environmental justice is that we cannot have a conversation about environmental justice without talking about social justice. And so it is very much included and a part of this particular work because it still impacts the least of these.
Friends, I want to just create I'm the one who's the pastor here, and something I say when we do a Q&A here, if you're talking in paragraphs, you haven't thought through your question. Now I'm not shaming. I just want to say that we have a limited time period, and I would love for you to hear what my colleagues have to say. So if you've got a question, we'd love to hear it. And Megan and Bob, don't let go of the microphone. That's like, see, you stand like, you just take it. So that's what we're going to do. And I just want you to know.
I just want to say something in response to the last question. Michael Holzman, I'm one of the rabbis at Northern Virginia Hebrew Congregation. And Reverend Messman, I don't eat grits, okay? With sugar or without sugar. This gentleman, what's your name again? Bob? John referred to us as an organization, what we did as an organization. I just want to say that's a vast overstatement. This is a group of people who know each other, who are toiling in the vineyard of the Lord together, who were summoned to be together on the bus, and that is the extent of how organized we are. And what happens going forward is going to depend upon people who feel the call, the summons to do this work going forward. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Hello, my name is Bob Bevins, a congregant here. Would you tell us what things you have discussed about the current anti-Islamic and anti-Semitic problem in this country?
The anti-Islamic and anti-Semitic, that's what he said.
Regarding the overall, obviously the trip was to really experience what happened in Virginia. And during our conversations, it was a 3-day long trip. We also spoke about the current issues that our nation is facing, the attack on the church, on the synagogue in Pittsburgh, or attack at other places of worship, Islamic centers as well. And everyone shared the concerns, and this is a step moving forward, that all of us realize that these are some of the areas that we need to work together. And I think I'm very hopeful that our cooperation, collaboration, learning from one another, participating in the events that, such like this, events like that. I had many times I had driven past the Frying Pan Road many times. But Cure was the first time, the Cure event, that brought me here and put me on the bus with all of these faith leaders. So it's a real camaraderie, it's a real, a brotherhood, and that we feel for one another, and we'll move together to address these issues.
I appreciate the question. I think we are living through time of rising hatred in a lot of ways. And I do not have fear about anti-Semitism in our area of course I have fear, like all of us have fear going to Walmart and going to high school and all the other places that we have fear right now. We're living in anxious times. But my fear about anti-Semitism, I would say, is tempered because I know that I can pick up the phone and call any one of the 25 people on this tour and many others and say, I need your help. I need 100 of your Presbyterians to come surround my synagogue now. And I'd have 200 show up. Methodists too. And yeah, sorry about that. And Baptists. And yeah, the Christians are very competitive. So I'm not afraid of that, but I will share this personal response. When I showed up at college, by the way, I'm a white Jewish kid from South Florida, which means I'm partly from New York, and when I showed up at college in St. Louis, my next door neighbor was a black kid from New York, and within like 2 days, we were in probably the single most pointless argument ever, which was worse, the Holocaust or slavery. And I'm embarrassed to admit that. And the reason, first of all, it's just stupid, but second of all, the reason I'm so embarrassed is because, and there was reference to the Truth and Reconciliation work in South Africa. The reason I'm embarrassed is because there's lots of horrible, horrible things that have been done in world history to lots of people and lots of hate that still exists in the world. But the architecture of racism and slavery has never been dismantled. Whereas the regime that perpetrated the Holocaust was completely annihilated and defeated in war. But the regime that perpetrated racism and created racism in this country, we are all part of it. And so there's something essentially different about this conversation than the other hatreds that we're grappling with. And we're grappling with real hatreds. I don't want to minimize those too, but this is different. So.
Just quickly would like to add, we live in a very diverse, very affluent in a way area, Northern Virginia. And sometimes we think that the anti-Semitism or Islamophobia only happens in certain parts of the country. But 2 days ago, my daughter, who goes to George Mason, on the way back, she stopped at a Panera because her friends were there and they asked her to come in Fairfax. She stopped, parked her car, and when she came out, it was around 9 p.m., both of her tires of one side were slashed. So she sent me the picture, and I looked at the pictures of the tires, and I realized that it was deliberate. So we called the police, and police agreed that it was a deliberate attempt. So these things are still happening, and all of us must be watchful and careful.
My name's Cheryl Calhoun, and I'm part of the First Baptist Church of Vienna. My question goes to the trip. Taking a trip for 3 days with people you sort of know seems daunting, frankly. What preconceptions did you go in with, and how were those proven or disproven? And what'd you learn along the way that surprised you?
Actually, as I looked at the video, and most of the talking heads when you saw us reflecting was done on the last day of the trip. And I knew that being on the trip, as you were saying, I knew what was being stirred up in me. But I was actually surprised and encouraged at the level of honesty and sharing by the clergy on the trip who were not African American. The fact that exposure, like I said, 2.5 days of exposure had such a profound and moving effect on them. And so, the question that I now say is, so how do we build upon that? And how do we create opportunities for other people to have a similar experience? Not an experience of pain necessarily, all that is, that's an important part of it, but an experience that is awareness. An experience, one of those things where it says, once you know, you cannot unknow. And so we are thinking together about how we might work within our congregations and communities to provide similar opportunities, whether it's through small groups or trips or whatever.
Daunting is an understatement. I had no idea what to expect. I was very concerned, in particular, about how many other African American men would be on the trip, because I did not want to wear the total weight of that burden alone. And so I called Rob Cheeks and said, brother, you're in. Tell the missus you are in. And Vernon Davis from First Baptist as well. I wanted to ensure that I was not alone. But largely because these experiences are very emotional. They create opportunities to reflect and reminisce on that pain. I was very careful that I wanted people to understand that that pain did not translate to the fact that I am an angry black male. But that anger is real, it's warranted, and very often misplaced, or misunderstood, I should say. But it comes from a place where very often people just don't understand our plight. Someone mentioned earlier about being able to, Sean talked earlier about being able to take it off, put it on. As a black male, I can't take it off. In fact, the night of the original meeting, the meeting began, I believe, at 7 or 8. The meeting was called for 8 o'clock. And I was attending a meeting at First Baptist. And so I called Michael about 8:45 and asked, are you still there? And he said, yes. He said, I still want you to come. Well, this was my first time at the synagogue. And this particular night, I was dressed very casually in a pair of jeans and a shirt, baseball cap. And when I pulled into the parking space, I immediately went to my back seat, as I would normally do, to grab my backpack. And something said, no, leave the bag in the car. And I said to Michael that if he had not met me at the door, if he was not the person who met me at the door, then I would not have brought that bag inside of the synagogue. And he initially did not understand what I meant by that statement. But my reality is, at this point, I'm an unknown black male in blue jeans and a baseball cap, in the dark, walking into this new environment. I'm always thinking about how somebody is going to respond to me. And that's not everybody's reality.
We have one over here.
Well, my question was going to be whether there was a possibility that this kind of process could be expanded to include church members or people in general. And I think, Pastor Nickens, you answered that. But so I would just like to make it a vote that I would love to have access to this kind of a process.
Wonderful.
Thank you. My question, as an educator working in the DMV and surrounded by diversity in and around our schools, how could we create a compassionate students who can take a stand to end this, make peace, respect one another, and love one another without the hatred that has been brought on from generation to generation? Thank you.
We don't have a platform speaker, and so we're not hearing all of the question. But I think your question is, how do we help raise people, essentially?
She asked, she said, as an educator in the DMV, which has a lot of diversity, how do we raise children and students who can be compassionate for one another and end this racism?
That's what I thought. So first, that's a huge, beautiful question. I'm a white person who grew up in a racist society, and that had direct impact on me and became a part of my fabric. And so from my experience, what I can say is that if you want to teach your children well, one of the first things to do is to help them with empathy. And empathy in my life really began through relationships and through learning. You cannot be empathetic toward those you don't understand because you think that everybody was raised like you and had all the same things you had. And this is why the phrase "do the work" is an important phrase for white people, because you have to do the work of understanding, why is it that I always had enough and felt so secure? And why is it that other people reasonably feel insecure? Why is it that other people feel threatened when I feel very comfortable? So one of the things I did in my adult life in this church was to go to Sierra Leone, Africa for the second time in 2002. And there was an African-American member of the church, Derek, a friend of mine, who also was sitting next to me on the plane. And as we landed in Accra, Ghana, he looked out the window and saw African people everywhere, because we were in fact in Ghana. And he looked at me and said, "Your world is getting darker and darker." And my world is getting better and better. And he said, "You're finally going to understand what it's like to be me." And we both laughed, just as you did. We both laughed about that, but you only laugh at things that are true. Humor things that aren't true aren't funny. And I remember walking through that airport realizing how terribly insecure, and I want to say fearful, I felt. And suddenly I gained empathy. Now, I have many other stories that we don't have time to share. Mm-hmm. My point is, the great thing about the Washington, D.C. area is that we are raising our children with each other. And so we have this very diverse community, and we have resources that the rest of the country doesn't have at their fingertips, like walking through museums and walking through. So the history is all around us, but we have to put ourselves in places where we receive it. And when you parent, you have to intentionally guide your children, and you have to model the behavior, but you can't model behavior that you have not yet assumed yourself. And so we have to do our work to help them do their work. And that's one short answer. Is it really? That's your So he goes, "That's my wife, so you better."
So the question asks about how can we, as educators in the schools, change things. I just want to make us aware that this, and the previous question about assumptions getting on the bus, this work happened in the context of people of faith. And getting on the bus, I had not one shred of anxiety, because I knew I was traveling with people seeking the presence of God, and people who are comfortable with that search being public, and people who grapple with God's word all the time, and that the struggle with God and the love of God and the feeling of God's love, all of that is a part of the vernacular of this group. And I had no fear in a vernacular that's shared in different languages in different ways. But I had no fear because that unified us. And the schools don't have, nor should they, have that background. That's not their purpose. But that is the purpose of church and mosque and synagogue. And our institutions, we should not underestimate the importance of our institutions in this work, because we can teach empathy in ways that the schools just can't. Now, parents can teach empathy in ways that we can't, and if you have adolescents, we can teach empathy in ways parents can't, because adolescents don't want to hear anything from their parents often. But I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that this was clergy or congregations, people of faith, doing this work together, because I think our faith and our relationship with God has a lot to do with this work. So.
My name is Tony Ivey. I'm a member of First Baptist Church, and I was really moved by what you all have done and achieving transparency for some of the people today that mentioned that I'm a racist, and really get transparent with that. I'm extremely moved. I wasn't planning on coming to this event today, but I'm glad that I did. I learned a lot. My question is, given that we see even a lot of racism coming from the highest office in the land, from the White House and from Congress, was there any conversations about what we can do as a faith community to balance that or to counter that racism that seems to be coming from our politicians and from even the White House?
And an odd silence fell amongst the panel.
Yeah, please.
I said an odd silence fell amongst the panel.
I
The question that we're having that problem. The question, if I understand correctly, is amongst the political world, we hear racism. Is that fair? And in the White House. And how do we deal with that as faith community leaders? Is that essentially the question? It was better when you asked it, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah. This is back to what I was saying before. The political world serves a purpose. The political institutions serve a purpose. Politicians have a job to do. Their job is to gain as much power as they possibly can to push forward their agenda. And unfortunately, the accusation of racism and the reality of racism are being weaponized in the service of gaining personal power. Anti-Semitism as well. I don't know if people are paying attention to the way in which the national politicians are utilizing accusations of anti-Semitism to build up their own personal power. And this is deeply cynical work. We hopefully all live in environments that have viewpoint diversity, which means that if we're Democrats, we actually talk with Republicans and vice versa. And my hope is that we can, in our conversations with each other, we can step away from that weaponization of this issue. And this issue is much longer and older than these political parties. And this issue, unfortunately, will be with us long past these politicians. And I think we need to rise above it and not buy into it, because it's deeply cynical things are happening in our world right now, with this being used as a tool.
Yeah, and I think we have to resist the notion that there's a racist party and a non-racist party in America. And we have to keep doing the work all the time. And if there are voices that want us to not do that, these are our houses. And the beautiful divide between state and church and synagogue and mosque in the United States, that faith community divide to the political divide, allows us to do what the prophets did in Old Testament time, in Hebrew Bible times, and to speak to power, but not spend so much time speaking to power that we divide ourselves and our communities. But we have to, I think there are times when we simply have to speak. After Charlottesville, when it was suggested that there were good parties on both sides, I had to stand in that pulpit and say, that's not true. That's all I had to say. But if I didn't say that, then I was a part of the problem, because the silence is a part of the problem. But it also doesn't mean I have to take on every politician that says everything. And there are also other politicians. You know, I just read a great biography on Grant recently, and he has a phase in his life when he made a very anti-Semitic decision. But later in his life, he did repair work. And he was the legacy of Abraham Lincoln, that that eliminated the Klan from the South until it quickly came back in after he was out of office. So the point is, there are many presidents, there is much history, and we have much to learn from all of it.
And I'm just mindful of the fact that Trayvon Martin was not killed when Trump was in office. Yep. Neither was Sandra Bland, right? Neither was Eric Garner. Neither was Michael Brown. So whoever happens to be in the White House at this moment is not the root of the problem. The problem is what created the opportunity for what we see at this point. And so, again, I think it speaks to the fact that it has to happen among the people. The current administration was voted in because something that was said appealed to the lesser angels within each of us, which is one of the reasons why it is so imperative that we do this work within our faith communities and at the ground level. Because, as I said, it's not one man who got us here, and getting one man out of office won't necessarily change the climate. It might make things a bit better, but that's what I'm saying. This was a rot. This was an evil spirit that has been making its way throughout our culture for a long time. And the fact that we then had an elected black president, I think, made all of us sit back and say, well, glad we solved that problem. It's not solved yet, so that's all. And I also just I have to shout out black males. I love you, but I just want to say, women, okay, we are also carrying the torch. Because men are killed, but their mothers are the ones who are weeping at their graveside. And so I'm just very, very proud of the women, particularly the women of color, but all of the women who are part of this journey, because we have often been silenced, even though many times we are the ones who have been on the front lines in many places. And so I'm just really honored that our sisters are here and want to do this work. And then the final thing that I wanted to say, because we have over these last several weeks really been mulling over, so what is our next step? What is our next step? And we're just beginning to get perhaps a little clarity around that. But one of the things that really encouraged me was when I was speaking with Kay. Kay, are you still here? Okay, right. And Kay was talking about when we were knocking around the idea of perhaps forming groups, some conversation groups. And she presented this idea of having almost two kinds of groups. One are bridging groups, and those would be groups that would have sort of like the cross-racial conversations. But also, just as important, is to have affinity groups, which would be groups where people who are of like skin color, or whatever you want to say, are able to have honest conversations with each other and to heal our pain, if that's what we need to do, Jackie. And also, even for, let's say, white groups, to have those conversations and say those things that you would never dare say in a mixed group. And it cuts both ways. And so I'm encouraged by perhaps finding a way so that we can offer both of those models for those who are willing to go deeper in this, and then hopefully then we can begin bridging better with one another.
I'm sorry, I have to go back to that question and add a different perspective and different voice. I strongly and firmly believe that we have an obligation to speak truth to power and to call out racism and injustice when we hear it, when we see it. If we only do it in moments of national tragedy, that we've missed the mark completely. Mm-hmm. Silence is deafening. Silence is deafening. Silence is deafening. Once the election is over, once the winner has been declared, when you serve in an office, you represent the entire constituency. Silence is deafening. And so you have an obligation, we have an obligation, to speak to it when we hear it and when we see it. And what's most traumatic for me And I may not agree with your party affiliation, but if you allow this rhetoric to take place and you do not speak to it, then you have not helped me, but you have hurt me. Silence is complicit. That's it. All right.
Okay.
How you doing? Let's give a warm welcome to the collective choir.
sounded forth the trumpet
that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching
Wow, okay. That's K1, everybody. Can we have a round of applause for K1? Wow, thank you. You're an artist. That was amazing. So, we are approaching on the Jewish calendar Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, just coming up next week and 10 days later. And on those holidays, we have a very important prayer that we sing, Vinu Malkeinu, Chonenu Va'anenu, Ki Ein Banu Ma'asim, Aseh Imanu Tzedakah V'Chesed V'Hoshienu. We sing this over and over. Vinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, our parent, our source of life, and our sovereign, the one we acknowledge is above all of us. Chonenu Va'anenu, be gracious to us, give us grace and answer us. Ki ein banu ma'asim, because we have not yet done the work. We have not yet, we lack the actions, literally. We lack the actions. Act for us with tzedakah v'chesed. Grant us tzedakah, which is justice, and chesed, which is love. V'hoshienu, and save us. This is what we pray over and over. So I've been given the task of coming up with the ma'asim. What are the actions that we are going to take? And I think perhaps I was given this task because my Spanish teacher, when I lived in Costa Rica and I took Spanish, she said, "You are a great student." I said, "I'm not that good at this." And she said, No. She said, "You are not afraid to make a fool of yourself." And in order to learn a new language, that's what you have to do, is to make a fool of yourself. And I believe that in this work, we are all going to make fools of ourselves at different times. In this work, I've had plenty of opportunities to say the wrong thing, to search for the right word, to fumble about and be incoherent. I have most likely stepped on toes and been inarticulate and betrayed trust at times accidentally. This is going to be what it takes because our country lacks a language. We are inventing a language of racial empathy that does not yet exist. I have been in contact with the leaders of our state. They don't have the language or the answers. I have been in Congress sitting in a conference room with African American and white Jewish and non-Jewish and Muslim members of Congress, and they were turning to clergy, looking at clergy to provide the language. And I said, heaven help us. Literally. Avinu malkeinu, chanenu va'anenu, ki ein banu ma'asim. Be gracious to us and answer us. We lack the actions. We don't know what to do. And so I'm going to offer some things we can do. A list that is incomplete and incredibly important. If you are interested in this topic, my question for you is, what will you do about it? If you want to see change, what will you do about it? This is a question I'm asking myself. I do not have time for this work. There is no time in my schedule. Members of my synagogue board are in the room. My synagogue president is right over there. He knows my schedule. I have no time for this work. And the question is heavy upon my shoulders. What will I do? None of us have time. But nobody else is going to do this but us. So, here are some options on your card. There is a college fair at Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. And hosted here, it's here, sponsored by Mount Pleasant and hosted here. And this is incredibly important for young people who don't have that person in their life pushing them on to the next level. And this is an opportunity to support that. If you want to help make that happen, please check that box on your card. We live in a commonwealth with a complicated system of racial oppression written right into the law books. We recently, through the work of Voice, raise your hand if you don't know what Voice is. Voice is Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Engagement. It is our way of expressing power in society and making change happen by gathering together and showing the people who make decisions, whether that's in government or in business or in schools or wherever that is, by showing that we have numbers and we have a voice, we can get them to change what they're doing. So the system right now is designed to punish poor people and to punish people of color when they get ensnared in any aspect of criminal justice, even when innocent. The system is designed to raise money like a bake sale through court fees. Our court fees and fines are a bake sale for the state and for local jurisdictions. If we want to make the change happen on that, we're going to have to do it through Voice. And if you want to be a part of that effort, check that box on your postcard. And by the way, the fines and fees issue is just the tip of one of many icebergs. There are many others out there, and we are researching them. If you want to be a part of the research effort, check that box, okay? Third, work on equity of education at Hutchinson and Herndon and other elementary schools, hopefully as well. We know that our local elementary schools right here in Reston and Herndon lack adequate after-school programs, and children are going home to empty homes. Principals have told us to our faces as clergy, sitting with principals of elementary schools, that their fourth graders and fifth graders are being arrested for dealing drugs after school. Fourth and fifth grade. These are kids without adequate after-school programs. The county does not have the resources to provide adequate after-school programs right now. If we want to make that happen, we're going to have to come together to take on that project as a local community. So these are issues that we were talking about the president. This gentleman over here who asked about the president. These are issues that go from the nation right down to our local neighborhood school. And we could use your help with that. Fourth, If you would like to receive information about what we're doing, like bus tours or discussion groups, or what Pastor Nickens was talking about when we were talking about continuing these conversations in some organized way, we don't exactly know what that's going to look like. Kay has some ideas. We have other ideas. We're trying to figure this out. If you want to help us figure that out, check that fourth box on your card. And we'll be in touch to help try and figure out what comes next with this group of congregations. And last but not least, not on your card, I was just handed this flyer. We are blessed. Reverend Berlin has been so articulate about being a Virginian. Reverend Messman about being a Virginian. Others have talked about being Virginians. We're all Virginians. And we have the blessing of being surrounded by an incredible history of founding our nation, both in the good ways and the bad ways. One of the good ways is that we have a tribute to historically black colleges and universities happening right here in Mount Vernon on October 5th. And this is sponsored by Black Women United for Action and the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. And I have a flyer here, and Sheila Coates is right here, and she can answer questions afterwards. That's not on your card, but if you're interested, you could talk with Sheila afterwards about that event coming up. It's at 11 a.m. at Mount Vernon, no cost. And I'm looking at the featured music and speakers, and it's going to be pretty amazing. So that's an opportunity. There are lots of ways to be involved in this work, and this list is incomplete. We can certainly use any help that you would like to give. And I turn things over to Reverend Walton here.
Actually, Michael, I'm going to ask if you would not go too far, and I'm going to ask Naeem to join me as well. We hope that you have been encouraged, inspired, motivated by this opportunity to hear from the participants. Our prayer is that we would move from this place and begin the work together. We invite each of you to get to know one another in community. We invite you to share the experience that you've had this afternoon with others. And we invite and encourage each of you in your own way and by your own unique experience to begin to make a difference right where you are. Because if each of us participate in making a difference, then the world will be different. I'm going to ask both Naeem and the rabbi to give a closing prayer in their tradition. I'm going to ask also Michelle if you would join me. And while she's coming, as each of them would offer prayer in their own tradition, I'm going to ask that we would all stand, and at that particular time, Michelle is going to lead us in one of those old Negro spirituals that she is so great in doing, right? And we shall close collectively in prayer.
All right, you heard it in the video. Simple song says, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to Freedom Land. Amen? All right. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Oh, turn me around. Oh, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to Freedom Land. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna, and we are marching up to Freedom Land.
Avinu Malkeinu, source of life and one who is above all of us, give us courage on this work. Bless those who brought us here into this sacred place. We owe them a debt of gratitude for hosting us. Bless those who have been courageous in sharing their stories and trusting that they will be heard. And give us all the fortitude to share our stories, to make fools of ourselves if need be, in pursuit of your vision of a world healed and redeemed.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise is to Lord of the worlds, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most compassionate, the most merciful. We ask you, God Almighty, that the journey that we started, it was just a beginning. Give us strength to continue on this journey. Give us wisdom, give us courage, and make us among those who stand for justice and equality for all. Amen.
Now may the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the peace of God, be with you and with us all. Amen.